at you. And your platoon of Judoon near that lagoon. You know what they say? One person's arbitration is another person's interference. Very blurry line.
Beware the Lone Cyberman.
You're only 5 minutes behind someone who just had their memory fully restored.
Better written. Pillar of Hope. Better written. Very cliche. Better written. Pillar of Hope. Better written. Very cliche. But I still felt that story was fairly boring.
That's all this here is.
You don't even have to watch it in order.
Better written. Very cliche.
Who cares about Doctor Who? Series 12, Episode 5, Fugitive of the Judoon. Well, that was something, wasn't it? Talking this very memorable episode will be myself, Neo from Australia, as well as Ingiga from England, Looms from Ireland, and Storm from Russia. I think we've all had somewhat mixed feelings on this Series 12 so far, but this episode may have put us in a mixer on the highest setting.
Yeah, a thresher, perhaps. Pressure cooker, a blender, just lots of knives.
Yeah, so I'm not sure we could even attempt to summarize this episode, Fugitive of the Judoon, but nevertheless, of course, we're going to dig into its many spoilers now. But first things first, I think we should have a little positivity circle. What are things we liked about the episode? Gig, what were the goods here for you?
Okay, rapid fire. I liked Jack flirting with Graham. I enjoyed the bickering with the Judoon. And I enjoyed certain characters' murderous turn towards the end, including the mutilation of said Judoon, and just generally swagging around causing chaos. So yeah, I enjoyed those elements.
Looms, what did you like?
I liked Jack's scenes, sort of, but it's just fun whenever you get to see John Barrowman just be John Barrowman, even if it's for 5 minutes. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed most of the scenes with 13 and our new favourite Doctor. And the Judoon are always just fun anyway, so I like them.
Yeah. Storm, what did you like?
Well, I liked the Judoon. How they looked and how they sounded. I think both bricks and costumes, animatronics, whatever, looked great. I liked most actors. I think Lee was pretty good at subverting expectations from being a bad person, as we thought he would be, like, and he turned out to be a guardian. And I liked Gat, not just because she's cute, but she's cute. I liked Jo Martin. I think she was nice. It was, I guess, best directed episode of the series, and well, let's say that's it for now.
Yeah, I share most of what you guys liked. I loved seeing Jack again. I couldn't believe it when we started hearing that American accent. I was clutching my head in shock. Absolute surprise. I think we've known a few things coming this series, but we had no real clue on that. I mean, Barrowman retweeted the trailer for the episode, but that's not that weird for an actor to, tweet about a show he used to be in and obviously loves. So that was a great shock. They really pulled off that surprise, and I was very excited to see him. I liked, what was his name? All Ears Alan.
Yeah.
I thought he was funny. I liked all that stuff. That felt kind of the Vinay Patel, who of course wrote Demons of the Punjab last series, which was far and away my favorite episode of it. I thought that felt kind of like his folksy, maybe even domestic kind of humor. I thought that was really funny. Like Storm said, the direction I thought was more interesting than the last few episodes. It was going a little overboard on the lens flare, especially in the Jack scenes, but there was a real kind of pep to it. It looked nicely alive. Jo Martin was pretty cool, both before and after the big shift. She was quite likable before, and then after she had a lot of swagger, she was quite assertive. I agree with you guys that the Judoon looked really cool. It was fun to see them again. Their voices were great. What I really liked, I'm not sure if this was so much in their Tennant era episodes, but like the main Judoon kind of got admonished by Gat and by Jodie a lot, and he like would kind of pull himself back a little, or he'd like bow his head and he'd like do these little grunts, and I just thought it was very cute to see, the big rhino head act kind of ashamed, like the ashamed cop. That was good. What else?
Is that about it? You've run out.
The effects, I guess, looked pretty good. Like, there was a lot of effects in Jack's scene where his ship's flying around. That looked pretty decent for Doctor Who.
I like the teleportation effect so much we got to see it like 100 times.
Yeah, we got a lot of that. Barrowman looked good too. Like, it's easy with these things for actors. You go, oh, geez, it really is 15 years later. And maybe there was a little bit of that. But when I saw him, like, I bought it. I didn't think, he's not pulling that off.
For me, with Jack, though, there was a few sort of moments where it looked weird to me. Maybe it's just what I was watching it on, but there was a few bits that looked sort of, oh, they've got a filter over him.
That's interesting.
His wig, I mean, his hair even, reminded me of David Tennant in the 50th anniversary special.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Very flattened.
The Graham and Jack interactions, I agree. They were really funny. I know people are saying it's getting old, but I love the Graham getting mistaken for the Doctor joke. I think it's a joke that good that they keep going back to it just because it's a good laugh. So all that stuff was good. So there was quite a few good things in the episode. What was the episode about, by the way?
I think calling it an episode is really not proper. It was just a sequence of events that sort of happened.
Events beyond our comprehension.
Yeah. The grand chipping.
It felt like it made more sense to me when I was watching it, and then I stopped and I started thinking about it. And then I watched it again, and I was, paying real close attention to it. I was taking notes and everything, and I can't work out what the story here is. What is this actually? It's just like a series of reveals that are very strangely paced. Like the Jack stuff, what do the Jack scenes accomplish? It's like he just parachutes in and he sets up episode 8 by saying, beware a monster, all of you would beware anyway, especially the Doctor, who always bewares them. And then he basically leaves, but you think, oh, he's probably going to come back, in the finale or whatever. That seems to be what would happen, But Chris Chibnall, talking to the mirror, he had a few words to say about that, and what he said was, you won't see him again this series, I can categorically tell you that. But who knows when he might pop up again. We love Captain Jack, we love John Barrowman. I hope that won't be his last appearance, and that at some point he gets to meet the 13th Doctor. So he's completely confirmed there that is his sole appearance in Series 12, was to say, beware the Lone Cyberman.
It's sort of fitting, because he's such a big Finish character now, that the cameo really felt like some Big Finish would try and hype up. Like, we're bringing back the 10th Doctor for this special multi-Doctor thing. He's in 5 minutes. And
check out the new 8th Doctor McGann box set featuring the Lone Cyberman, the new epic villain from Nicholas Briggs.
And it's even his first few lines are just audio only. It always makes you wonder, like, is Barrowman actually going to show up? Is this how they're getting around him looking a bit more like the face of Bo than like he looked in Series 3? But he does show up, and yeah, he's just, it's like he's just advertising. But the bizarre thing is he's advertising something he's not in. He's not in episode 8. And I wonder if this scene was even originally in the episode. Like, you'd assume it would be, because that's how scripts tend to work, but it's all on this one set, and it's all just stuff that, like, it has no connection really to the rest of the episode. There could have been some other explanation for Graham disappearing.
I was reading on Twitter, someone said that all the exterior scenes were filmed in March, let's say, and I think Jack's scene was filmed, I think, August, or months later anyway, after the fact.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that is like maybe the most blatant, this is a really weird script, and I'm not sure it's making much sense, part of the episode. Was there anything else in the episode you thought was kind of to that effect?
The fact that there's so much establishment of Ruth pre her conversion, whatever, Ruth as her human persona is so established, and we're set up to think of it as like a human nature sort of thing, like with David Tennant. But once she breaks the glass, that's just completely out the window. We spent so much time on that whole thing, but it's just abandoned. I get the sense this sort of story is meant to be done perhaps like it was in Human Nature, with quite a big emotional impact. And there was none of that here. It was very much just, they just threw it away.
I was stunned by like the non-reaction to Lee, her husband, her companion's death. Like he died and no one seemed to care all that much, including the viewers.
She just stared at the camera. morosely.
Oddly bloodthirsty episode, wasn't it, too? There were quite a lot of deaths, actually.
Or maybe not deaths. Maybe it's just teleports and they all
Oh, yeah.
return
It
in the
might be
finale.
like... Yeah, the Series 1 finale, they're all getting teleported off to Ranskor Kolos or somewhere. They're all just fine.
Or maybe the finale we can use an extraction chamber to get Lee back, like in Hellbent.
I'm bringing him back. Yes.
Well, he was a Gallifreyan as well. He, Gat, and the Ruth Doctor were all Gallifreyans.
They said that Gat and Lee had the same training, so I assume they have to be Time Lords, both of them.
Yeah.
But it's weird how Judoon's detectors didn't see that Lee is from Gallifrey, even though he didn't seem to lose any memories or use Chameleon Arch. It kind of doesn't make sense, or I'm missing something.
Yeah, there's a lot that doesn't make tons of sense there. Like the Judoon finding Ruth at all. It's like we can completely sidestep the question of like where Ruth is, whether Ruth is before Jodie or after Jodie, or what. The fact that Ruth is like a very clearly a doctor, calling themselves the Doctor. They have the blue box. This all makes them pretty famous, you know, so much so that the Judoon and Gat and all these people know about them. But like, how many situations have we had before where like a character knows the Doctor very well and they know like all the Doctor's past faces? We've had River Song, of course, and the Daleks, and Testimony from Twice Upon a Time, and the Cybermen, and the Infrarium from that Series 7 minisode.
Atraxia.
Yeah, and so these places have never seen Ruth. Like River even has a photograph of the supposedly fairly secret War Doctor, but no one knows about Ruth. So how did that strike you guys?
Well, you know, Neo, I believe it's you who always says that the show is not beholden to the past. You know, the show doesn't have to respect Moffat's law. It's a new show. It can do whatever it wants. And, you know, just because Moffat didn't include Ruth in the lineup of Doctors doesn't mean she can't be there. So, yeah. I mean, to be honest, I find, like, plot sort of mess-ups and mix-ups and stuff like that to not even be the biggest issue, because it's just like I have more. We can get into this later maybe, but I have bigger concerns about what kind of story Chibnall thinks he's telling here. I have deep reservations about all that.
That's fair. Inconsistencies are inconsistencies. That's not a huge issue, I suppose.
Doctor Who is about change, so you should just stop moaning and love it.
The Doctor Who is about change stuff. I always find kind of like, I don't think the show's changed that much over the years. Like, people like to say this, and I know what they mean. Like, we get new aesthetics, we get new writers in all the time. It's like a Ship of Theseus thing. Totally different crew of people, you know, over the decades. Totally different groups of people create this show. But, like, at the core, it's pretty much the same. It's been for a good few decades by now. It's, you know, there's an alien with human companions that travels around time and space, having adventures, sci-fi adventures, you know, sorting out scrapes. That stuff is all pretty consistent. And so I find like the vaunting of change like a little bit weird, because like, what are we actually changing mostly in the show? We change the actors a lot. We change the sets a lot. What else gets changed?
The tone, I guess.
The tone,
maybe.
yeah.
From time to time, you'll get some new addition to, like, the lore, so to speak. Like, we find out that the Time Lords have a ghost basement, or we find out that the Untempered Schism is a thing, and Rassilon put a thing in the Master's head. Like, we get dribs and drabs and stuff like that.
All those things are like lore elements you put in the finales, usually. I feel like every series of the show could have the Ark in space in it, or every series of the show could have the Unquiet Dead basically in it. And I feel like saying this is, you know, the most adaptive changing show in history is kind of off the mark, because if you can have the same structure of episode in every single iteration of it across, you know, over 50 years, then maybe that's kind of a deflecting point, I find, to kind of say, do not complain about a change happening, because apparently the show is always about change. And I don't really find that true.
Yeah, I seem to remember in the past we've advocated for the show changing more than it has in the past. I remember we were all wondering if Chibnall would make it a police procedural or something, or just another way we get some big status quo change. But yeah, the whole change thing, it's kind of a cope, because it's basically code for saying, if it's changed, that means it's good, But, it ignores the fact that not all changes are equal. Some things, changing them is actually maybe taking away from stuff that's interesting rather than adding to it. And I feel like in this conversation, we're just talking around the thing we all know that Chibnall is doing, but that we aren't talking about because it's not really relevant in this episode per se. Would that be right? I feel like we're talking about the whole thing.
If I'm to talk around that a little bit more, I think probably the biggest changes the show ever did was it had one season where the whole thing was like a court case. The whole season was a trial. And even in that, it still had excuses of like doing flashbacks and cutaways to traditional adventures you could stick in any season within that. But that was a fairly big change. And then we also had an era where most of the seasons were set all on Earth with John Pertwee. So we couldn't exactly have going, off to space adventures the same way most seasons did. And it became more like a James Bondy military, troop-esque, thrillery, gadgety kind of version of the show, which was very different than the kind of base under siege, monsters in the past, monsters from the future version of the show it had been in the Troughton years. And then the William Hartnell years are, they feel superficially quite similar to like the Tom Baker and Ford eras of the show, but there's something very different about the way the Doctor works in those seasons. How would you put it? How did the show work differently then? Well,
it was in its earlier stages. Like it was not formed into, the template that we know now. They were trying things out. They were building it, from the ground up. The Doctor was a different character. Certainly in the earliest stories, he is not the heroic figure that we are used to. Yeah. We see him grow into that, through his interactions with Ian and Barbara, and obviously his relationship with Susan as well. It's all, coming to the fore. They're trying out crazy things like Planet of Giants and Edge of Destruction, and it's quite volatile, and it feels like it could go any direction. It's very unpredictable, and that's really exciting.
Originally, William Hartnell, the first person to play this character, the Doctor, he was holding up rocks ready to bash people's head in because, of certain reasons. And he was very irritable, and he wasn't an action hero. He was often really quite passive. But these first two humans he ended up traveling with, really affected him, and it started changing his character. And then we had episodes like, there's an ending of one of the episodes of The War Machines where the camera for the first time zooms in on this really heroic stance as the Doctor starts taking like this active forward, almost action hero-y role in the narrative. And that's fascinating because it's a new thing. And then it was in later years, especially in like the John Nathan Turner years, where the tropes around the Doctor really got codified instead of being something that was kind of changing form and changing tone between each Doctor. And we started getting the version of the show we still use now, which is, the very smart action hero-y kind of Doctor that goes to a new place every week, has a new adventure, doesn't tend to use weapons, sometimes uses weapons, but doesn't really tends to use smarts and their human companions, mostly human companions, to, get out of scrapes, do the good thing. And so the great thing with the William Hartnell years is watching the show start off as this kind of meandering, ambling thing that really isn't like that. It's like these kind of aimless wanderings through space and the past. Sometimes it feels like an educational show. Sometimes it feels like this weird, trippy sci-fi surrealism thing, like in The Edge of Destruction. It's a show finding its feet. It's a show that forms into this very set show we have later. That's something really interesting about those years.
I think there's something, just before we divert back to whatever the hell we should be talking about, I just want to say, those early years, something about them feels sacred, quite precious, and kind of fragile. Like, if you did the wrong thing, you could easily, just kind of taint them or spoil them somehow,
They weren't really making Doctor Who then. The character wasn't Doctor Who as we know them. The character didn't become a Time Lord until the Patrick Troughton years. The character wasn't from Gallifrey until the John Pertwee years. This is where these ideas started taking shape. And of course, they retroactively apply to William Hartnell's character, but they're not something that they're trying to undo the character. They're just adding, contextualization to the character. So the great thing with those years, the magical thing with those years, is the show hadn't become what it became yet It was forming into that because of these very creative people in the 1960s who had these madcap ideas, and the ideas were so good they would eventually settle and collate into this show that could last for decades and decades. And fans of that show would end up running the show, and then fans of those fans who ran the show would end up running the show, and so on and so on. How does this relate to Fugitive of the Judoon, though?
Good question. Judoon! The Judoon have got us in a tractor beam. They're dragging us on board their ship.
There's Time Lords everywhere. Everyone's a Time Lord. I hate Time Lords. Fuck Time Lords.
Yeah, I sympathise. I do find this interpretation of the Time Lords that we've got going, I've said this before, it seems like it was inspired by the Last Day minisode, or just some generic, like, Star Trek thing, because rather than the kind of mysterious time wizards we're maybe used to in big robes and stuff, they just seem to be, like, you know, trained soldier operatives who just bum around killing people and hiring Judoon, and there's something really uncomfortably bland about it all. Like, genuinely, if this is heading into some sort of big Time Lord plot, I think this runs the risk of being the most boring interpretation of the Time Lords we have yet seen.
I think as a reaction to Hellbent, I think a big Time Lord Capital War episode will be... I think it will happen, because all the people who whined about that Moffat era didn't do, well, Gallifrey justice. I think Chibnall and BBC bosses are surely aware of that, and they will give some fun, wonky Day of the Doctor kind of story, but without good parts of Day of the Doctor, where Time Lords shoot at each other, and there's Omega and Rani who are generals and shoot laser cannons and some shit.
It seems almost like having your cake and eating it. The fact that they're gonna do some Gallifrey-related story, even though they've just destroyed Gallifrey forever again. Like, they're having it destroyed, but still having stories relating to it. It's like, oh my god, what's even going on at this point? Everything's so all over the place.
There's a real sense with that. So, I was mildly kind of defending destroying Gallifrey when we talked about Spyfall.
Changed your tune?
I think I just... With Ruth, there's a broader context for it, and that is, have you ever seen that clip of The Office?
I said that I wanted to have kids, and you said that you wanted me to have a vasectomy. What did I do? And then, when you said that you might want to have kids, and I wasn't so sure, who had the vasectomy reversed? And then when you said you definitely didn't want to have kids, who had it reversed back? Snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap. I did. Okay. You have no idea the physical toll the 3 vasectomies have on a person.
And, you know, that's kind of what's happening to Gallifrey. I feel like every showrunner is snip, snap, back and forth, changing what happened to it. It was destroyed, then it was brought back, then it was destroyed. And what I think this connects to that this episode did is, what we got here is the 5th new Doctor we've gotten in the last 10 years. 6th, if we're counting David Bradley's new version of the first Doctor. That is a lot of Doctors. In the classic era, it took decades to get that many. Here, we're doing it in much less time. And I think there's a very real sense of devaluing it, or getting rid of the novelty of it, or making less special. Gallifrey isn't as special now because we've already seen it be destroyed and then be brought back. How can we be as invested when this is happening again and again? How can we keep getting as invested in new Doctors when we keep having special cases like the Meta-Crisis 10th Doctor, and the War Doctor, and the Curator, and then a different First Doctor, and now this unknown Ruth Doctor. Do you see what I mean? That it's all making it a little bit less special?
I can't keep doing this, Clara. Burning the old me to make a new one. Again and again and again. We are trapped in our personal heaven sent right now.
I feel like if this show was healthy, it would be doing genuinely new stories. Like, you don't need to be touching on this lore. Like, there's something I admired about Series 11. It was saying, let's tell new stories. You know, we don't need to do all this very fandom-focused stuff Stephen Moffat was doing. This show is a great vehicle, a great engine just for telling creative stories set wherever we want, in the past or future or present. And you can debate how well Series 11 did, but I think that's a great brief if you're running Doctor Who, is to go, we can do anything with these characters. We can put them anywhere. We can tell any story. And when a show that can do that keeps retreating to itself, and like navel-gazing by going back to its own tropes and going, oh, we have a new special Doctor, oh, we've done something new with the Doctor's planet, It feels, Gig, how did you put it? You had a really good term for it earlier.
Right. I think it was when I said that it feels like the show Doctor Who is kind of eating itself.
Yes,
I think it's a kind of self-cannibalization. You know, it's plundering its own past and doing, we've got the true biggest secret reveal about the Doctor's true origins and the Doctor's past that she can't remember, you know, because the Doctor's the chosen one, and there's a secret about the timeless child and stuff. And in light of bringing up Moffat in this context, there's a kind of irony and a poetry, I think, to what I think was Moffat's last truly great series, Series 9, being mostly dedicated to this arc, the hybrid arc, that in many ways was almost a satire or a deconstruction of this kind of storyline, of where we find out the true big giant secret about the Doctor, why the Doctor left Gallifrey, and the true secret of the Time Lords and all of that stuff. And, you know, and that ends up resolving with a cheeky reference to 8 being half human, right? Moffat was very much saying there that, you know, why on earth would you waste time talking about how the Doctor is the special chosen one when there's so much more pressing matters to do in the present? You know, when you have the story of the Doctor and their companion, you know, the actual main relationship of the show, when we can start new stories like that we see in Hellbent with Clara setting off, you know, on her own adventure. Like, you know, we can do new things. Why are we just kind of dredging up the past and trying to, you know, just plunder around in there? It's not the sort of thing I think a healthy franchise necessarily does. It's just running out of ideas.
Does this show feel in the state where we can invest in the companions that much?
Good point. Considering
could
this
we do
episode.
a Hellbent with Yaz?
There are companions in this series.
Like, it's quite amazing that this series, it seems like everyone is saying, including us, the Doctor's most successful and most interesting scenes are when the fam gets all sequestered away and put in the timeout zone. Like, Graham gets, you know, zapped up by Jack to be on the same set and flirt or whatever for the whole episode, and the Doctor's getting her interesting things. Like, it's like the writers are actively treating the companions like a handicap, and that just feels like, if you talk about change being the essence of the show, it's a really interesting change to basically say, oh man, the human sidekicks are a real nag. You know, they're really pulling on us. We got to get rid of these guys.
And there were 2 times in this episode, I think. The first time was when the Doctor didn't even notice that Graham was missing. And then earlier on, near the start, Yaz, like, interrupted the Doctor and she was like, oh, I didn't notice you were even there. You know, the Doctor seems to be just actively just zoning out the existence of the companions. It's almost as though she doesn't really give a crap about them, and that's so odd. It's like it's a coded version of how Chibnall feels about them. Go on, Neo, what are you going to say?
I just remembered something else I really liked about the episode, and as I absolutely loved how 13 was like kind of mean to the companions and kind of dismissive of them. Like, at the start, what was she saying? Like, you ask too many questions. That's why I don't take you more places. And then at the end, saying, you don't know me. You know, your lives are like the blink of an eye to me. You guys don't know the real me. I found these, like, I'm not normally a huge fan of Jodie's portrayal, but I was loving, like, the vibe in those. And I thought it was a really interesting dynamic. It's kind of like Peter Capaldi and Nardole. Just this really amusing, like, it's just funny to see the Doctor who kind of denigrate their companions in that way. But of course, then she was super taken by the speech they made about, oh, you're the best, Doc. So that's over.
You know what that reminds me of now? The end of the Ghost Monument, where the Doctor had that moment where she was like full doomer, and she was like, I'm so sorry, we're gonna die. There's no hope. It's the end. And then the fam were like, oh no, we'll get through it together, Doctor. And that, you know, got her mojo back. You know, it's kind of insincere feeling to me. And all this stuff with the fam's bond with 13 being what, you know, the light in darkness, it would ring so much truer if there was any kind of meaningful relationship between the Doctor and the fam. And they're just, it's not there. It's not. Sorry.
We're talking about that scene early in the TARDIS. I love the idea that every night when they go to bed, 13 fucks off the Gallifrey to check if it's still broken. Yeah, it's still broken. Come back tomorrow.
I feel like 13 chasing after the Master is symbolic of how the fans feel about the Master probably not coming back for the rest of this series. Because I know he's quite a fan favourite now. You know, Sacha Dhawan's Master, but I don't think we'll be seeing him again.
I unironically really love this take on the character, although it plays into what we were saying again. Chibnall's version of the Master doesn't even we don't know where he comes in the timeline, and oddly canny move by Chibnall, empowering fans to decide how best this would work in their interpretation of the show, while not sinking his own story down in any way. Anyway, his master, there's no reference to Missy, who was, when was that on air? Series 10, 2017.
Yeah.
Really not that long ago, that huge character development for that character was. And this master doesn't even reference it, and it's back into that snip, snap thing, bringing back the master so soon and having their character whiplash back forth. It's I really love his portrayal, but again, it's you're devaluing this thing by using it so much. It's like the classic, the Daleks aren't scary anymore, which you can call silly for whatever reason, but when you use these types of characters so much, it's like a depreciation. So there's another example. But yes, I love that master. I was so confident he'll be back in this series, and I'm still leaning towards it, but the bizarre Jack thing being confirmed that he was only in that scene for this series makes me think, oh man, what is Chibnall doing?
I think I feel like we haven't bashed that Jack thing enough. Oh my god, it's just the cheapest possible return after 10 years for this character. And you've got Barrowman gushing about how great it is that a showrunner finally respected Jack enough to bring him back. And it's just for this worthless little cameo, teasing a finale he's not in, spamming some crap arc words that feel like a sort of half-remembered version of RTD's run. It's just like a sick parody, and it's really depressing. Because obviously recently I went through all of Torchwood with the Who Cares gang, and it's seeing how Jack has now just become, in one fell swoop, practically a zombie character. A character who just turns up in Chibnall episodes to just spout some terrible dialogue and serve no real purpose. That stuff is just, it's soul crushing. Jack was meant to be a good character. Jack was in Children of Earth, goddammit. Jack was in some really fucking good episodes of Doctor Who and Torchwood, and now he's been flanderized. He just turns up and it's just, If
you took out the bit about him mentioning the Lone Cyberman, it could easily be a Children in Need sketch they quickly threw together. It just felt disposable.
Beware the Lone Cyberwoman could be more appropriate.
The buzzword itself, the Lone Cyberman, it has such a fun film vibe. It's a Doctor Who monster plus menacing adjective. The Lone Cyberman.
Yeah,
It's
I
just,
hadn't thought of it like that.
The good Dalek.
When we watched it on stream, I just laughed at it like a fucking maniac. It's so fucking stupid. I don't know.
The naughty Sycorax.
Yeah.
I think you do a lot of these, the sort of the loquacious Alpha Centauri or something.
The lusty Slidian.
I really enjoy these Jack scenes for what it's worth, just because I love Barrowman's performance of the character so much, and it was so fun to see the character back. And he's one of the few actors that makes these vacuous technobabble terms sound exciting, because he's just so into it. It's how sometimes we say some of the actors in these series don't seem super into it or super believing it or super inhabiting the world. Whereas I totally believe he's zapping around on these ships, with the lasers and that. He seems so a part of it. It's so much verisimilitude with how he acts it. But yeah, then you think about the actual scenes and it's just crazy and hilarious.
It's so disorienting to see someone like John Barrowman, who's clearly having so much fun, having it up and being camp, opposite the rest of the fam that are walking, talking exposition.
Yeah, the fam feel like they would rather be anywhere but where they are. Yeah, I think just generally in Chibnall's era, whenever an actor turns up to play one of these scenery-chewing characters, the Queen of the Skithra, or Sacha Dhawan as the Master, or Alan Cumming as James, or, whenever one of these figures shows up, they steal the show, pretty much. And Barrowman would be another one. Because just Chibnall's era just feels so drained of humour and just madness that whenever even a drop of camp turns up, it's like manna from heaven.
How much Vinay Patel did you guys feel in the episode? Because he's first credited Chibnall's second build here. How much Vinay did you detect?
I just wanted another great Vinay Patel episode. I just wanted some human drama, some, maybe a good concept or two, some emotional heft, and I got whatever the hell this was. I'm I don't even want to, like, speculate about what Patel did or didn't do. Like, maybe he did some of the Judoon stuff, maybe he did some of the Ruth stuff, maybe he did some of the GAT stuff with the Space Marines, like, I don't know, but it's just like, I mean, we all read his blog post from before the episode aired, right? He was not exactly, gushing about his experience, I think.
Yes, so, what did he say in that blog post, Storm? I know you were the one who found that.
Yeah, I read his blog posts from time to time. He said that his collaboration with Chris Chibnall on this episode was, quote, fascinating, whatever that can mean. I know when he was discussing Demons of the Punjab last series, he did a lot of write-ups around it, and he always described it as a very personal story that meant a lot to him, and how being given a Doctor Who script to a writer of his field of work who was previously mostly doing theatre, and it's fascinating how much less enthusiastic he sounds about this episode. I know it's kind of unfair to assume that if he wrote about it less, he must hate it or something. I don't think he hates it. I think giving him an episode and making an arc bullshit with Time Lords out of it wasn't a good idea at all.
It's like, in Series 11, like Mallory Blackman, who was the main writer of Rosa, she didn't come up with the idea of that episode, and Vinay Patel didn't come up with the idea of a partition episode. Chris Chibnall came up with those ideas. He's talked to Doctor Who magazine about how he entered into getting the showrunner job, wanting to have a Rosa Parks episode, wanting to have a partition episode, and then he chose these writers for them. And then, of course, they make them their own, and Vinay in particular did a fantastic job with that. But it's not always that the episode writer gets to pitch their idea and the showrunner go, yep, you get to write that. Sometimes that happens, but often, even if the showrunner isn't a co-writer on their episode, the showrunner came up with the idea and told them to write it, told them to, flesh it out, come up with their own ideas. But in a case like this, when it's an arc episode, there's, even so much less than that. Like, Chris Chibnall must have given him certain briefs to do with this episode, and then Chris Chibnall was a co-writer on this episode, and then obviously Vinay did not come up with, Ruth or any of these ideas. It's like when Sarah Dollard wrote Face the Raven, she came up with Trap Street and all that great stuff, but she didn't come up with Clara dying. That was Stephen Moffat who told her, you have to put this in, you can kind of make it your own, but I specifically need these things done. And so it's like Vinay is such a great writer. I really, really like his style, and I love what he did last season. But it's like he's being so constrained here. I wish he had an episode much more to himself rather than all this.
It was a waste of his talents. Like, I mean, speaking frankly, I mean, this was a job, right? He was given a job, he was given a brief, and this episode, I mean, I think it's fair to say this episode does not really have much of a story unto itself, and it's not particularly about anything. It's just got a job of getting through a bunch of arc pieces and then getting them out of the way. And in that sense, it's almost, it's got a Mad Libs vibe to it. Like, it's sort of Chibnall's version of Let's Kill Hitler, because in Let's Kill Hitler, you've got an arc thing that needs to be kind of dealt with, which is River's first meeting with the Doctor, River reforming from her brainwashing and all that stuff, and revealing how River was, Amy's childhood friend and all that things, and and having Hitler in there and a robot that shrinks people is just kind of like Moffat throwing stuff in to make it fun, right? And in this case, you've got the reveal of Ruth and the secret origins of Ruth and whatever, and the Judoon, they're placeholder. They could replace the Judoon with anything, and it's like it's just an episode that's really lacking in a point. And, I despair seeing a writer like Vinay get used for something this mechanical and workmanlike, right? But, increasingly, sometimes Doctor Who just feels like a vortex where talented people go to be wasted on shit.
I think Judoon we need because of the clickbait title, just like fucking Hitler was needed. That's Hitler clickbait title.
That's a good start for the podcast there. Good quote. Hitler, similar to Judoon.
Speaking of the Judoon and thematic relevance of things in an episode, did you like the commentary on police brutality in this episode by having the Judoon around? What did you guys feel about that?
Oh, it's the most progressive episode we've had yet. I might dare to say. It's bad for cops to shoot innocent people, so that was a very brave revelation of Chibnall.
So brave.
I liked how Yaz was all saying, I'm police, I can talk to them, I know how to speak to these guys.
Oh my god, yes. And basically her and Ryan went out and then just got teleported away by Jack. Like, it just went nowhere. And what I love when Yaz was like, oh, I speak their language. I was like, no, you fucking don't. Shut up.
You're barely police.
She doesn't even speak much. She gets teleported straight away when she leaves the building.
You're right. That's terrible.
You're barely even training.
For all that we joke, right? I am seeing people around saying that this episode had commentary on police brutality, and oh my god, it's so cool to have a black woman beating up these trigger happy police. Yes, this is the sophisticated commentary on police brutality. I mean, I loved Graham's little line when he was like, "Oh, I thought they were police. Why are they killing people?" And the doctor's like, "Well, they're trigger happy police. Yeah, and okay, being serious, I think the trouble with stuff like that is that basically by depicting the space rhino police, who are an example of bad police, or this is what the police would be like if they were bad and if they broke the rules and stuff, you're not really getting to any sort of real problems there. You're not really getting to the core of the problem, because you're saying like, oh, well, as long as there are good cops who aren't like the Judoon, then that's fine. But a sentiment like that, is utterly unhelpful, because that doesn't erase the existence of, police brutality and cop violence. Having good cops around the place, that's not help. Sure, do they exist? Okay. But, has that fixed the problem? No, it hasn't. And it's very characteristic of the whole Series 11 Chibnall era approach to politics and to social messaging. It's just all over the place.
It's like just saying something like brutality bad or racism bad. It's aligning your stance with somewhere, but you're not doing anything meaningful with it. There's no engaging with why is it bad and how does it arise and how exactly is this happening? What makes it bad? Who is doing this? Who are the, involved actors? It's not doing any of that. It's just saying this bad thing, most people would agree is bad. It's not saying, well, when is it happening? Are there cases where it's bad, but we say it's good? It's nothing like that. It's just these big, lunky rhinos killing some people and heroes going, oh, that's bad.
We mentioned earlier the bloodthirstiness of the episode. What did you guys think of Ruth being a kind of more warlike doctor than we're perhaps used to, and them flagging that up a lot with 13 moralising at her all the time and complaining at her for sabotaging Gat's gun so she'd kill herself class style? Like, what did you guys think of that?
I really find this idea the Doctor doesn't use weapons grating, because it feels to me like one of those... do you know how John Barrowman talks about the golden age of Doctor Who, which was him, David Tennant, and who else?
Billy Piper.
Yeah. And
The Dream
John
Team.
Barrowman, Billy Piper, and David Tennant, were they ever in an episode together?
Journey's End, is it? That's the whole golden age. That's done in an episode.
Oh, good
that's a
point. Good point.
That's a very good point.
But that's not really so much an age, is it? It's an episode that is celebrating previous ages.
That's like an age.
I actually like this finale. I like Journey's End for what it's worth, but it's 2 episodes. That's not a golden age. Yeah, exactly. It's not an age. It's, an episode. So this idea of false memory is what I think is happening when we talk about the Doctor as a pacifist. And there are some great videos of this on YouTube that edit together clips from the 26 seasons of classic Doctor Who, where the Doctor wasn't a pacifist. They were more pacifistic than the villains, as you'd expect, because they're the hero, but they didn't just use sci-fi weapons, they would use guns sometimes. They're not someone really saddled to this idea of pacifism above all else. Sometimes that comes up in New Who, but even then, I don't feel like it's quite as much as it kind of gets talked about. It feels like it's something kind of adjacent to the show or external to the show rather than something really baked into the show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, especially considering when 13 was browbeating Ruth for, the weapon thing, Ruth was just threatening the Judoon with a weapon, right? And 13 was having a go at her for that. Ruth didn't shoot any of the Judoon. She just used the gun as, leverage. And, the Doctor's threatened people with weapons before. It's so bizarre how not even firing the trigger is now cause for moral panic at this point. It just, any sense of pragmatism has gone out the window. It's so bizarre. It's reached a point of self-parody. And actually, this brings me to something that I think is maybe quite crucial. We can get to whatever you're about to say, Neo, but something that I've thought since thinking about Ranscore a while back is that Chibnall knows that he's writing a toned-down show, and that in Chibnall's heart of hearts, and this is speculation, but I feel like Chibnall would maybe rather be writing something like Torchwood, where the characters are very, not one bit, bang, and very ends justify the means, and just, are very pragmatic, very ruthless, don't waste time, and that in that sense, Ruth, yeah, ruthless, yeah, meaning Ruth is the kind of Doctor Chib would maybe rather be writing, and perhaps that explains why Ruth feels so much more like a lead character, or, a character who Chibnall is interested in than 13 does, because 13 is just so bloody useless.
I think now we're talking Ruth, it's time where we can unchain a little bit. What you were saying earlier about 13 moralizing at Ruth, I want to think about the optics of this a little bit. So what's the episode getting celebrated for a lot, would you say?
Well, introducing the first ever Doctor of Colour, the first ever Black Doctor.
Yeah,
bravo.
And that's great. I've wanted that for many, many years. Even before Peter Capaldi, there were a lot of actors, they were auditioning black actors for 11 and for 12, and there are some of those names that would make absolutely fantastic doctors, like Patterson Joseph, I would have truly loved. And even besides individual actors, it's just... there is this whole huge world of actors that the show has been arbitrarily barring itself off from, for all its 50 years. It casts so many, white men in a row, which is just, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, and it's embarrassing in a way. Absolutely, that is the case. I love all the doctors except Peter Davison, but there's absolutely been and it's in so much media, and not just media, it's in so much, of the world, just ridiculous, terrible, bad, barring of, other ethnicities, other genders, to roles, to jobs, to positions. It's really, I'm doing...
Do you want to get to your point?
What I'm doing right now is a Chibnall, and I'm saying very eloquently, racism bad. Yeah. And sexism bad. So,
in the middle of a several minute long expository speech.
Yeah, exactly. I'm well in the tone here. And so we get Jo Martin, finally. And she's a good actor. I really liked her vibe, both as Gloucester tour guide Ruth and as Dr. Ruth. She had a real assertiveness and swagger to her, and she really kind of owned the room like a doctor when she was, Dr. Ruth. Dr. Ruth.
Dr. Ruth, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Ruth, Dr. Ruth.
So that was really cool. And so, obviously, people, feel like I do, and they're very excited to see the first woman of colour as a doctor, and that's great. But I want to actually think about it beyond just the optics and the superficial. There is a black woman who is now playing the Doctor. Awesome thing. Is she... what she's playing is not... She didn't get a big special announcing this is the new Doctor and she's getting, all these seasons to herself. This is the 14th Doctor. That's not what happened. What we got is an asterisk, like the Valeyard or like the Watcher or like the second David Tennant Doctor or like John Hurt's Doctor. We got a footnote, an asterisk. Also, this was this alternative form. There was this Doctor we never saw before that arose in another Doctor, Jodie Whittaker's episode. And so
she's a stunt. She's a stunt character, basically.
She's a stunt character. And so, I kind of... What does that cake say in this episode again?
Please just do better, for God's sake.
You can do better. Yes, you can do better. And then
Secret message from Vinay.
And then, what is the Ruth Doctor? What happens to her most of the episode? She gets Jodie Whittaker. What's Jodie Whittaker?
A white woman. A white blonde woman.
She gets a white blonde woman moralising at her, as Gig said, for most of the episode. So the first woman of colour playing the Doctor spends most of the episode getting admonished by the main white Doctor. Doesn't get her, own era or anything. Doesn't get most of the episode to herself. she's a footnote in another Doctor story. And I feel like that doesn't feel like something to celebrate to me. This feels like a cheap move. Do you know what I'm saying? What do you guys think?
Well, I fully agree. I think it's cheapened. Like, let's say now the 14th Doctor is a person of colour and they're a great actor. They're always going to be the second child.
Yeah.
It's not going to be this big thing that it should be.
Do you remember that David Tennant Christmas special, The Next Doctor, where we got, this guy looks like he's some future Doctor? He wasn't really. But what this makes me think of is if that guy was a woman, and then when Jodie got cast, people were like, oh, cool, it's the second, because there was that David Tennant, where there was kind of a woman Doctor. And it's like, why are you just taking away, that by this weird little footnotey minor stunt casting thing? It doesn't feel like something I want to grab and say, yes, finally we got, someone to play a Doctor in 5 minutes of the episode, never to be seen again for so many episodes.
Yeah, Chibnall has preemptively stolen the thunder away from the real first Doctor of Colour. And obviously it's in this tokenistic way, which is like saying, well, if we insert a black woman into an earlier part of the show, presumably the Doctor's past, somewhere, I won't make conclusions as to where exactly they're inserting Ruth, but it's implied to be in the past somewhere. And by doing that, instead of actually casting a new a new Doctor as a person of colour, say 13 or 14, it's a cop out, right? Because you're going, oh, haha, see, now we have changed the law and that's fixed racism. We have solved racism, guys, by tweaking the law of the show, instead of actually making a material, impact to change the future, and change what you're doing in the present. It's crap, I don't feel pandered to by this.
I'm going to quote Chris Chibnall again from that same interview to The Mirror, where he said, Jack's only in this episode. He also says, the important thing to say is, she, Jo Martin, is definitively the Doctor. There's not a sort of parallel universe going on. There's no tricks. Jo Martin is the Doctor. That's why we gave her the credits at the end, which all new Doctors have the first time you see them. John Hurt got that credit.
I just want to say about John Hurt, when he got that credit, it was on screen in huge text. Jo Martin's is tucked away at the end of the credits sequence, at the end of the cast list. It's like, it's night and day, really, isn't it? And when he says no tricks, what is this whole episode if not a trick?
Well, he elaborates on that. He says, there will be answers to some of these mysteries in this series, but as ever with Doctor Who, answers often reveal new questions. It's all very deliberate. We're telling an ongoing story, and there are plenty of things in Doctor Who that change all the time, but I'm very aware of the history and very aware of the continuity. It's a delightful thing, but stories are ongoing pieces of fiction. They develop and evolve. My job is to be bold with the storytelling and have fun.
Bravo. I hate this culture of rewarding Chibnall. All the interviews seem to reward Chibnall for just doing what he's meant to do. He's the writer. He's meant to write. Stop fucking acting like it's this big, amazing thing that he's telling an ongoing story. Everyone does that.
There's this weird level of supplication to Chibnall and the show in general, just kind of floating around everywhere. Not just the fans, but, the criticism, the reviews around the show and everything like that. I think people really have just been kind of lulled into this state where if we have Jack on screen in an incredibly shitty cameo, if we have the Judoon on for a bit, if we have someone mention Gallifrey, then it's the most epic, mind-blowing episode ever. I'm screaming, I'm shook, I literally can't, okay? Wow, this is a game changer. We are not okay. Fans are losing their minds. Doctor Who just flipped the whole script. It's fucking horrible. This is Doctor Who morphing into every other rubbish piece of pop culture that we've been watching slowly die, like your dog succumbing to rat poison it was fed by Scientologists. It really sucks, and I feel like, by the end of series 12, when the other shoe has dropped, we are going to be looking at, just devastation here. It's not going to be pretty.
I just keep coming back to that cake because you are not asking too much to ask for not just a coherent story, but an actual story. You're not asking too much to have, the first Black Doctor not be a footnote. You are not asking too much to have episodes not only make sense, but make you feel emotions properly. You're not asking too much for the companions to have characterization. You can do better Like, you do not have to be satisfied with this. The show has been better. The show has been brilliant. And I love loving the show. And I would love to love this show now, but I'm not going to, act like this is okay, because it's not. This is terrible.
All ears Alan was right. He's the new Binro. And if you haven't watched the Ribos Operation, then you'd better do it before a certain episode feature in Series 12 comes up. But anyway, sorry.
Well, what sort of thoughts do we have left lying around?
I've just got one thing. Both the Doctor and Ruth say at different points in the episode the words, "I know my own life," which gives me the impression that Chibnall is legitimately trying to parallel the chameleon arc Ruth with the Doctor not having any memory of this whole timeless child Ruth business. And I'm hesitant to say that really works or makes any sense, but that certainly seems to be what he's trying to do, so it sure is a thing.
On that note of the timeless child and the Ruth Doctor's existence and placement and whatnot, very astute listeners may have noticed us dance around this topic earlier in this discussion. I think waiting until the finale or so for things to be confirmed makes more sense to really dig into what is going on there, if everyone knows what I'm talking about.
Probably it might be best to clarify. I mean, we've been jokingly alluding to the word Ruth in previous episodes of this podcast, and that's because there has been a leak that we have all read, which seems to be accurate. So the reason we're being so cagey about stuff is because we may or may not know where this is all going. And we have feelings about that. Quite a few feelings.
But it may well be too early to judge such things. So in the finale, we can share our takes directly on such a thing. But careful listeners may have picked up some of our takes. Just some other little issues from my end. The first is very minor, very petty, you could say. But in Smith & Jones, the Series 3 premiere, Martha's first episode, where we first meet the Judoon, when they assimilate a language of a human, they say, "Language, Earth, English." In this episode, when they assimilate English from someone, they say, "Language, human." And I think that speaks rather Anglo-centric volumes. Something else I thought was strange was the final conversation between Ruth and 13, where Ruth just says, "I'll drop you at the docks near my flat. How's that?" And that's what happens.
Yeah.
They haven't sorted out where they are in the incarnation order to each other or something, even though they're both clearly very intrigued by it. Why didn't they do the contact thing of touching each other's heads and trying to sort that out? Or why didn't they literally just talk? Like, did you ever wear celery? Did you ever do this? Did you ever go on that? Like how Eleven and River used to compare their diaries. Like,
yeah,
it's such a non-story thing. So in the style of this episode, for Ruth to just say, "Oh, you should go," and then we cut to 13's gone outside. Like, why not? Why didn't they? It just makes no sense. It's such a non-story move.
Can I add one more thing? If
Please do.
Okay. It's not directly related to the episode, but it just so mind-boggling thinking that Vinay, a writer who was incredibly sensible to not to do anything bad or offensive or tone deaf in Demons, in his previous work, in his theater work, and how can Vinay possibly be okay with how the Doctor treats the Master in Spyfall? How does television even work? Did he read the script and he was just okay with it?
I don't feel like there was necessarily that much inter-writer coordination here. Like, or at least if there was, then Chibnall was not listening to any suggestions he got. I mean, if Chaos in Cardiff was activated, I just feel like the scripts would not be getting to the point where people could offer suggestions and say, actually, Chibnall, maybe don't put that in. I just don't think that was happening, or we would not be getting the episodes that we are getting.
I think on that note, what is it our musical friend Deadlocked said? "We love you, Vinay, but what can we say?"
I guess we kind of like the way you numbed all the pain.
Indeed.
But not anymore.
We loved you, Vinay, but what can we say? I guess we kinda like the way you numbed all the pain. And now our hearts bleed, and our tears fall, and Muff's not here to get us through it all. We let our guards down, and she pulled the rug. I guess we got too used to being some show that we love. It's over now, are we fucking done? I guess we got too used to being some show that we love.